are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. Joining me as usual, Mr. Kevin Durso. Kevin, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It was a bit of a tough week here in Flyerland, and we'll be getting into that in just a moment. As we dive into today's show, subscribe to us everywhere you find your podcasts, sportstalkphilly.com, all your normal social sites. We're on social media at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. We're trying to get our numbers up, trying to get this out as much as we can. So, all right, diving right into it, we have 4 games to talk about. Our last show was recorded, and we thought we were only going to have 3 to talk about. We got an extra one in there, some scheduling issues, no worries. We will be back next Sunday. Goal is to get out every Sunday during the regular season. Diving right in. We started at the game I attended,
I was waiting
which,
for this.
let's be honest. Okay. Kevin, you've been in the box for 8 years?
Just with the station, it's 11 total,
Oh,
actually.
it's 11 years total. Okay.
Yeah.
How many games have you seen with a worse 60-minute effort?
Oh, I mean, you're asking me to do this over 11 years of a period that was not very good to begin with. I've seen plenty. I can't count them on
Okay.
one hand for you. Like to say that
Okay.
it is, that is concerning, though. I will give you that. Like,
As
generally
someone who's not
speaking,
in the box quite, or who's not in the building quite as much, that was the most abysmal effort I've ever seen live. If not the number one, I'm willing to favor some recency bias. It's definitely in the top 3. I was also here for the Dave Hatchall years. I know. But it was just, there was nothing. It was maybe the sloppiest hockey I've ever seen NHL players perform, if you will. It was atrocious.
yeah, I mean, well, it followed up the home opener. The home opener, you could kind of lean on, and it's excuses. I get it, but you could lean on. Just got back from the trip on
No
Friday,
off
and
day,
no
jet
off
lag.
day.
Yep.
They didn't even have a morning skate that day to go into it, so it was everything was just they tried their
Weird.
best to do the recovery from the cross country travel, and it didn't work, and they just didn't really have it that night. You had 2 days off in between, no travel involved, no nothing. You were home from the home opener to your second home game, and came out absolutely flat. And actually, it's not just that you came out flat. It's not just that. You really need to come out of the first period, like you should come out of the first period, not making 2 mistakes on the power play that lead to shorthanded goals, number 1.
Yep.
And then, honestly, it was kind of a sleepy enough second period that, like, across the board, nothing happened. There were no goals in the middle period. So somehow or other, you're through 2 periods of a bad game and still in a position to potentially make something of it, which it looked like they might do, because Travis Sanheim scored the first goal for the Flyers, or the only goal for the Flyers that night. But
34 seconds into the third period.
exactly. And you're setting yourself up for, all right, maybe a switch is flipped. Maybe
It's a
something's
1-goal
going to
game.
happen
You got
here.
19
The 1-goal
minutes.
game. Exactly. And you give it right back a minute and 4 seconds later.
Oh, and I can tell you the crowd was up instantly, right? Like, so
Well, that's the
game
first.
start.
That's the first goal on home ice. Period. It took. We were sitting there in the press box having
Making jokes about the goal song.
no, not just. Well, yes, there was people doing that. I
Oh
wasn't.
man, the jokes about the goal song were
I don't
really
worry about
funny.
that as much. It really doesn't phase me one way or the other.
It was pretty funny though when you go through a
No. We
whole
were just.
home opener.
We were just counting
out.
at this point. It was 3 periods on Saturday, and it's 4. Now it's 5. Are they going to get shut out again on home ice for another
I was worried
time?
about that.
And then they come right out in the third period and put that to bed. Okay, it's not a shutout. And it's now a 2-1 game. So you have a chance to make something of that game. And then you just, like I said, you just give it right back immediately. And that took all of the air out of the balloon. It was over right then and there. And the rest of the game was just going through the motions again.
The crowd had 2 moments in that game. You have the Travis Sanheim goal 34 seconds into the third period.
Right, which lifts people up into thinking you have a shot. And then the other one you're going to tell me is and the other one is the Nick Laurier fight.
It sure is. Because, man, when I mentioned that this may be the worst effort I've seen live, Nick Delorier might have single-handedly kept it out of the bottom spot
By having a
because
good tilt with somebody.
that, and not just anybody, man.
No, it was
Dylan
Dylan
McElrath
McElrath.
is
I know.
huge. He is Matt Rempe sized. He is enormous. And obviously, we all know Nick Delorier is not scared to drop the gloves with just about anybody in the National Hockey League. He is not afraid to throw absolute bombs at just about anybody in the National Hockey League. And they did that in this case. And these two absolute heavyweights stood there and slugged it out for just about 2 full minutes.
And the thing is I know where you're coming from, because as a fan, you're looking for anything in some especially in games like
Sure.
this. But you're
Well, it's a
looking for
1-0
anything.
game. It's a 1-0 game. You gave up a shorthanded goal. You look atrocious. You can't complete a pass. So the fact that you look this bad through the first 3 periods plus 4 minutes on home ice, I'm glad that Nick Delorier is in that lineup. I asked for it on last week's show because he's dropping the gloves less than 5 minutes into the game, and like clockwork.
But you just need to give him a dancing partner, is really what it is. If there's somebody on the other side who's willing to go, then he'll find him. That's what it
Well,
turns.
and that's why I wanted him in the lineup, because it turns out the Washington Capitals have about 6 of them.
Well, ironically, though, I'm wrong when I say that, by the way, because the last game we're going to get to, there is a guy on the other side who is totally willing to do that. And those two never got together at all during the course of the game, that the last one of the week. But I get what I'm trying to say is that for you, that's going to turn into a highlight as a fan, because it's the thing that
There was nothing else to highlight.
there's nothing else to go off of. And you know what? If you can't beat him up, right? Like kind of also a thing. Like, I'll pull that, right? I just look at and I look at stuff like that, and I from my perspective, and trying to have an honest approach to covering the team, and sit there and go, I don't have time for stuff like that. I'm not saying at the time what he's probably trying to do is swing momentum, drop the gloves, get everybody fired up. He skates off, he's firing people up, he's trying.
And he did, right? Like
he's trying, but like when that's the only thing you can pull out of games, it means your team's not very good.
For sure.
It means your team's not very good. If that's what we're pulling out of games is, hey, did you see Nick Delorier beat someone up? That's
Nick
great.
Delorier was like their 4th best forward last year. Like, yeah, of course. Of course it means you're not very good.
No, last year they had plenty who were better than that.
But you know what I mean.
Because we just talked about it last week with how many games at the end of the season did Nick Delorier get scratched in, and then how many to start the year was he a scratch again? So it's like, clearly by the end of the year, he was not that critical to the on-ice product that you're making it like, oh no, we have to put him out there. No. Well, no, but like the case you made last week for, boy, when Nick Seeler comes back into this lineup, like they actually look like they miss a player like that. And you're right. It does look like they miss a player like that. And he's still finding his way, but he's had moments. Like, definitely had some moments. Definitely looks like he's willing to participate in any aspect of the game. He's come close to dropping him a couple times.
And he's never met a block shot he didn't like.
Sure.
Oh, almost to a gruesome extent. That man is sick.
But I don't feel the same way about Nick Delorier. I
agree. Nick Delorier is not as good of a hockey player as Nick Seeler, and I'm certainly don't think that's up for debate.
He's got his role and he plays it well. That's all there is to it.
I was arguing for him to come into the lineup for this game, especially with Jett Luchanko out of the lineup. He did end up getting sent back. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But with him out of the lineup, obviously another forward is going to come in. And, Nick Delorier is going to draw in eventually. And when you have an effort like you did in your home opener, and you have a team like the Washington Capitals coming to town, it's a pretty good time to get Nick Delorier in the lineup. And I think it worked out, right? It's not really his fault that they gave up a shorthanded goal. He's not on the power play. He comes out a minute and a half later and tries to keep the crowd in the game, and it does an admirable job. Like I said, it's a great fight. It kind of ends in a bit of a draw, but it's a great fight. It keeps the crowd involved. And then obviously, you give up a goal, another shorthanded goal, a few minutes later, and the life kind of drains out of the building a little bit.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like,
that's not Nick Delorier's fault. He came in and played his role really well.
It's not his fault. You know what else keeps the crowd into a game? Playing well. Yeah, playing well.
Shots on goal.
Sure, shots on goal. I think that's a big discussion point this week.
It's the discussion point this week, as far as I'm concerned. Now, you
Yeah,
did
because
have
you
10
don't know
in the
why, because you
first
got to have the
period against
puck to take
Washington.
shots on goal.
Yeah. Yeah, and you did have 10 in the first period of the first game against Washington, but then you only had 3 in the second period and only 5 in the third. You only ended up with 18 shots on that.
Well, that's what's particularly concerning, I think, to me, is
In a
that
game you were trailing after 4 minutes in.
well, listen, the 10-4 in the first period is aided also by those power plays that
Yes.
you get power play time. Yes, you're giving up chances, but it didn't mean you didn't get any shots at all. And honestly, it was even, and this makes it look a little better. You took 3 penalties, well, 2 technically. So there was 2 power plays for you and 2 power plays for Washington. And you still ended up with 10 shots in the period, despite killing off 4 minutes of penalties. They didn't score on the power play in this game. It was they scored shorthanded.
Goals.
Right. Yep. So, but to get just 8 shots from the first period on, over the second and third is terrible.
Yeah.
It's absolutely terrible. And then they opened up in Washington, and look, low event first period, the game the next night in Washington, and it's a back-to-back, so everybody's a little conservative. I get it. So I'm not going to go crazy when Washington only had 6 shots on goal in the period, but you only had 3 in that period. And it's like, yep. Here we go again. So you literally at that point could almost add up the previous 60 minutes of game time and come up with your first period shot total from Tuesday. It was 1 over it. It was 11.
Yep. And then you get to Wednesday, and in the first period, you have 3 shots on goal.
That's what I'm saying. I'm adding that to it.
Yep.
Now, after that second period, they obliterate that.
I mean, well, you also give up 3 goals in the first 7.5 minutes of that period. So at that point, it's a 4-0 game, and score effects kind of take over to some extent, right? A lot of those Flyer shots came in the back half of that period.
Well, sure, absolutely. Because again, for the first half of the second period, you're sleepwalking through it again. Yep. And then finally, somewhere after the fourth one, you're like, oh, maybe we should start playing because we're about to lose again. And you get it back to you get it back to a respectable territory, but this is now a common trend that, look, we started when the first show we did last week after games were actually played. We started with, like realistically, I know we did one like right after the first weekend, but like the first weekend, you took exactly what you could take from it, which was nice opening game win, opening night win. And you got, screwed over a little by the schedule with, very next night, still out on a road trip, travel, play immediately in a game. And you did what you could to keep that respectable for 2.5 periods, 2 3/4 of, almost down to 5 minutes left in the third period. About 6. And then all of a sudden 3-2. Well, 3-2 turned to 5-2, but it's not as long of a period of time that 3-2 goes to 5-2. And you're sitting there looking up at the board going, it's a 3 goal. You're down by 3 goals with so much time left in the game. Like it feels over already. No, it just felt over right then and there, and time ran out on you. Respectable effort in Edmonton. Get the game to overtime. You nearly pulled it out in regulation. You were down to under 4 minutes to go in that one in regulation with a lead. So that's very respectable. And then something common has started to happen from that game on, from the first 3 on. In Seattle, you gave up 4 goals over the second period. You were down 5-2. So you spent the third period in frantic comeback mode, but you're trailing by 3. So the game feels like a blowout, right? At that given moment, it feels like a blowout. Then the Vancouver game happens. That third period, you spent the entire period down 3-0. It was already, nobody scored in the third period, so you were down 3-0. As the Washington game unfolds, first of all, it's the 2 shorthanded goals, so it's 2-0. It's still a 2-goal deficit going to the third, and then you play the majority of the third still facing the 2-goal and eventually 3-goal deficit where the game feels over. Washington, you go down 4-0 before you start to make that push. Hold for the Minnesota game happened on Saturday, but guess what the other one was? You're down 4-1 in the second period against Montreal.
It doesn't matter if you're the best team in hockey if you're already down 4 goals.
It's not even about
I,
that. It's no,
I know.
to me, it's the biggest goal of this season was not necessarily still wins and losses, but you had to remain modestly competitive to keep people's interest because that's what people liked about you last year. So if you
And
want
you
to
got
take another
teams
step,
and you got teams running you out of the building in the first half of games.
right. And it's not even just, well, and I'm not even going off of the first half of games because like Seattle didn't get on a big run. Like it was a 2-2 game until all of a sudden the final 5 minutes of the second period and it's bang, bang, bang in the net. Felt the same way with the Montreal game. You're down 2-1 and then it gets to a certain point and it's two quick ones. Well, now it's 4-1. Guess it's a blowout kind of, right? Like here we go again. And like this is where that, and this wasn't 2 seasons ago. Like this wasn't Tortorella's first year. So I don't want to go and just like make it like paint it as that picture. But you remember the year that they trailed 2-0, I think it was in 32 of 82. It's starting to feel a lot like that, where it's like if you're going to take yourself out of games quickly, you're going to have no interest quickly. Like it's just going to be the expectation is you're going to lose. And it might still be the case even if you have a competitive team. But this is non-competitive to a degree. Like
No, no,
there's
no.
I'm not taking away that there's some good things that happen throughout the course of the game. Of course there is. There's always maybe a positive you can pull. Somebody playing well. Hell, half the time we're going to pull Michkov's performance and say, hey, the kid still looks good, so that's all that matters. They're losing and the kid looks good, so that's all that matters. But maybe so, but you have a lot of stock in all of these other guys possibly being part of the picture. You have a lot of stock behind, well, maybe this is what Morgan Frost needs or Tyson Forrester needs or Joel Farabee needs. And if those guys don't start to pick it up soon, they're going to possibly look expendable. It's going to look like you're going to have to start well, we talked a lot about, hey, they got a lot of wingers, right? And sure, Michkov's definitely one of them. And you can't fault Travis Konechny, who's up to 10 points in 9 games. He's definitely playing his typical part, right? Like Konechny is giving you, and this is why when the thing with the contract came up, the part about the contract that people should hate is that it adds on to other pieces, not directly to Konechny's part. It like if you're paying Travis Konechny that for what he typically gives you, it's going to make total sense in the long run from an individual standpoint. But as a collective standpoint, you were sitting there and asking yourself, basically, with all these other guys starting to be under contract, with you signed your goalies, they're under contract. Now Michkov's here. You have Tippett under a long-term contract. Farabee's got term. Scott Lawton still has term. Couturier's got all that term. And you're sitting here saying, Konechny's part of that. We're bringing him in too, because we don't need to have to wait out those deals. But now you do. Like now, not you do, but it's now though it's either those guys start to put it up or it's going to be a big waste of time for a long period because you're going to be riding out long contracts that nobody's going to want.
Well, what did we say about this year coming in, right? This is an audition year in a lot of ways.
It is.
This is about who can play with Michkov, who can play on his other wing, who can play his center. But even beyond that, at a bigger picture level, it's who's going to be on the roster. We're building it around this Russian kid, but where are all the other pieces? Where does everyone else fit? And those guys who have have underperformed, haven't stepped it up, if we haven't taken the step, whatever terminology you want to use, or maybe their ceiling just isn't quite high enough, right? Maybe they are a third line player, but the Flyers need a top 6 player. Whatever the case may be, this year, if it's not going to be a playoff year, and through 9 games, it doesn't look like it right now. If it's not going to be a playoff year, it's going to be about figuring out who's going to be on the roster that does eventually make the playoffs, right?
Sure.
So one of the names that I have in mind here, and you and I talked about it a little bit before the show, and there's some flexibility to it, but it's Scott Lawton.
Mm-hmm.
He's got 2 years left, this year and next year, making $3 million.
Mm-hmm.
You have a couple options with Scott Lawton. You can trade him at the deadline. You can retain half if you want. I don't know if they will. For a year and a half, and you'll probably get pretty decent value because Scott Lawton is the type of player that any team looking to make a deep playoff run would love to stick on their fourth line or in their bottom 6 somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You can move Scott Lawton after this season when he has 1 year left at $3 million. Maybe you retain again, maybe you don't, whatever. Again, that's a conversation for another day. You can ride it all the way out to the end of his deal and then let him go, or you can ride all the way out to the end of his deal and re-sign him. Those are kind of your basic options. But it's time to figure that out, and that's going to be figured out this season. Whether Scott Lawton is right, whether the Scott Lawton is gone in the short term, gone in the slightly longer term, or if he's a part of this team long term. And I'm just using him as an example because I think that is the case with a lot of members of this roster.
There is also an element though where Scott Lawton fits a certain role too, right?
I agree.
Like if Scott Lawton is sounds like a great option to put on the left wing of your fourth line because that's where he fits anymore, then go ahead and keep him. That's not the issue. Like I know everybody wants to move on because like Lawton's name has been out there forever and everybody is ready to move on from him because again, it's the same thing as the Couturier argument. You're tying Sean Couturier and Scott Lawton to an overall era that has sucked for the large portion of it. So you're
so I'm
the
not even necessarily doing that. I love Scott.
No. Oh, I'm not talking about you. I'm speaking generally of the fan base.
Okay.
No, I'm speaking generally of the fan base.
I just wanted to make that clear.
Because I see it all the time. I see it all day, every day. I've seen it already to start this year about how well they better move Lawton because like someone get into Danny Briere's head and make like I don't care how good of a guy he is, it's time to move on or whatever, right? Like, and that's what people say. My thing is that I think Lawton fits a role that you're okay playing, not only playing him at, but paying him what he's being paid to. And if you like him for the room that much, then let him be the fourth line guy. That's not your issue. The biggest issue, think about it. What do most teams do with their fourth lines? It's not about going out and being able to score a ton. It's just maybe it's maintaining. Don't lose momentum. Don't give up a goal. And we're good, right?
Enough. Yeah.
Pretty much. So we're worrying about, like, again, if you're worrying about Lawton's production or trying to factor that in terms of guys that have production, I'm sorry. Take the guys whose overall package of skills when they were drafted was supposed to be about production and heavily criticize them even further. Like, I get Lawton's associated with a long period of time where they haven't been good, but these other players are not living up to the hype right now. Like, I'm sorry, you have two guys on this team, at least two guys that I brought up already that were 20-goal guys at one point early in their careers and now have to find a way to kind of maintain that because that's what's needed. That's what's going to keep you in the middle six. You're a typical 20-goal guy. That's what Tyson Foerster and Joel Farabee need to be. And if they're not going to be that, then they're going to end up being expendable down the line.
I agree. And like I said, I was just using Scott Lawton as an example. I think this is going to be an evaluation year for Danny Briere in a much more visceral way than last year was, right? Because you jump out to, the big, playoff points race lead and you kind of play this weird game of chicken with the playoff race. Mm-hmm. Last year got to be a little funky and a little weird. If this year heads the direction it looks like it's heading, then it will kind of be his evaluation year, and it'll be a bit of a tough evaluation year. And mm-hmm. I pulled Scott Lawton up as an example, but I think Noah Cates is going through it. I think Morgan Frost is going through it. I think Bobby Brink is going through it. I think a lot of your younger players who may have roster spots secured for now, I think if you are honestly evaluating this team from a talent perspective as Danny Briere, as Keith Jones, as John Tortorella, you have to be willing to evaluate those players honestly. And if they are not living up to what they need to be living up to, I don't think there's a ton of untouchable names on the roster. Like truly untouchable.
The thing is, though, and then this is a great point.
Contract situations aside,
but this is a great point that it leads me into I think it's going to lead me into my next point pretty well, honestly, because let's just take the four names we've been talking about the most with this: Morgan Frost, Joel Farabee, Tyson Foerster, Bobby Brink. Okay, what do all four of them close to have in common in some way? Because you want fair evaluation, right? And I'm not saying that this doesn't mean that every so often this happens, but fair evaluation.
I thought you were going to mention going to college in Boston.
No, no. What do they have in common? So you started the week off. You were there Tuesday night. Who didn't play?
Tyson Foerster didn't play. Or no,
yeah, he didn't.
No, it was Tyson. It was Tyson Foerster out, right? Okay.
Tyson Foerster didn't play.
Yep.
By the end of the week, Bobby Brink was the one not playing. Joel Farabee at one point in time had like a game where he had 9 minutes of ice time. He was one of the lowest forwards, and John Tortorella talked about, like, I got to get him ice time. I know I have to, but You're not going to tell me that there's not some form of purpose behind, well, he's not the guy I'm throwing out first after the power play rotation. He's not the first guy out after the penalty kill rotation. I want Michkov out there. Of course you do. No kidding. You want him out there first after a penalty kill. He's fresh. He's ready. He's got more offensive skill set. Fine. And then Morgan Frost, who spent against Minnesota, didn't play for the last 15 minutes. And then the next night was on the fourth line.
All of a sudden, if you've been listening to the show for a long time, you know I love Joel Farabee. You know I love Joel Farabee. But all of a sudden, we have a player who's making $5 million for the next 4 years. And what's he doing? What's he doing?
Well, no,
is he
not
on your
third?
Is he on your okay? If this is an audition year and we're looking at the roster, the roster, capital T, capital R, the roster that we're looking for to make a run, to win the cup, to whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Is Joel Farabee on your third line making $5 million? I don't know, man.
I mean, not at this production level. No,
that's what I'm saying. Not right now.
Sure, but I'm also sitting there saying,
you certainly can't pay Joel Farabee's not a fourth line player, but you certainly couldn't pay him fourth line.
But what I'm going back to is that, so I was, it came up in conversation, just generally speaking, earlier in the week. And I went back and I found a clip of a show we did 6 months ago. It was not even the end of last season yet, but it was looking like the beginning of the end, right? And I found a clip from that show, and I talked about there are 3 things I think are possible from one year to the next if they don't make the playoffs. The first one was about a regression, about how you got a lot of guys played over their heads that past season, and now good luck replicating that next year. And so far, you're seeing that a little bit. You're seeing that.
Some of that.
Well, you know where you're really seeing that from? It's from a lot of guys I was worried about. And it's not your Joel Farabees or Bobby Brinks or Morgan Frosts or anything like that. Because
Jamie Drysdale looks terrible.
That's not even where I was going to go with it. But you're right. No, I'm going to it's your Ryan Poehling, Garnet Hathaway, the guys who stepped up so much last year that now it's like back to the norm. But I'm saying, well, and
I understand that.
Where I'm going from with that also is that Hathaway's taken a ton of penalties, and I know he takes penalties by just being physical, but he's he's taken a lot of penalties that are not of that physical variety with stick penalties.
I think
Poehling is too, by the way.
I think Garnet Hathaway is a victim of something we've seen a lot of guys in the NHL fall victim to in the past, where he drew a ton of penalties last year. Mm-hmm. One of his big skills last year was starting a kerfuffle, drawing a penalty, not taking one skating away. NHL refs don't tend to let that go for too long.
Right.
And when you develop that reputation, you stop getting calls and you start getting a few more ticky-tacky calls on yourself. And
right.
He has to adjust. He's a professional, adjust. But I don't think he's getting the whistles he was getting last year.
Look, here's all I'm saying. And I'm not I don't want to make this about just him. I'm just pointing out he's up to 14 penalty minutes. And I don't believe any of them at this point are a fight or a misconduct.
I don't think so either. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'll pull back a little bit on the penalty thing for Poehling. He's only got 6 penalty minutes. I just think all 3 that he's probably taken are avoidable. And it's and not to mention the fact that it's dude, you're one of the fastest players on the team. If you're taking stick penalties, we got a problem here.
Yeah, you got to be able to put yourself in a better position.
But at the end of the day, this is where I'm going with the other guys. I get it. You're trying to get out of this mess that you're in to start the season. The record speaks for itself. It's 2-6-1 through 9 games, and that includes the 6-game losing streak that had 5 in a row that were regulation. I get it. But you're also at a point that I'm looking at the names who are at the top of the points list, and we already mentioned Konechny and Michkov. Sean Couturier is at 6, largely due to his 5-point game against Minnesota on Saturday, which was fun. Don't get me wrong. There's a difference between Couturier got 5 points and only has 1 in the other 8 games in that game. Travis Konechny got 5 points that day, but then has 5 more to go along with it that are scattered over hey, he scored in this game. He scored in this game. He, you know what I mean? It's not Konechny's been invisible for every other game like that, and as they try to figure it out. Couturier probably doesn't have
No,
points like that.
by and
Couturier,
large, Travis Konechny's probably been your best forward night in, night out.
roughly, and he's like, he didn't even practice on Friday, so he's clearly dealing with something. Like, they had an off day Thursday, then didn't practice, or he didn't practice Friday, so he's dealing with something. But even so, he was dealing with something, then went out and had 5 points, and then scored again the next night. Like, 6 points over the weekend is pretty good for a guy who's banged up a little bit.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned earlier you kind of look at Travis Konechny and the contract, and it's kind of a lot, and it's it's a weird contract just given where the team's at and where the team's going. But I will say, to his credit, he shows up and plays like your best forward night in and night out. And when the guy
Pretty
is
much.
making the most money, it's about all you can ask for.
I mean, pretty much. I don't think anybody had a good game on Sunday at
No,
all.
no, 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 no.
No, in fact, I'll tell you, the one guy who had a good game that I agree with, and John Tortorella did give him credit after the game, I'll agree with this. Travis Sanheim had a good game on Sunday.
I haven't said that too much this year.
Because when you think about it, like, again, this is roster construction for you as you try to go through this rebuild. We're going to get to the goaltending, which is a whole case in and of itself. Defensively, this looks like what we all thought we were getting a year ago. That's here now. You already touched on Drysdale, who has been brutal especially on Sunday. On Sunday, I don't know where his head was at, but that was a brutal performance in particular. Like, he has moments in other games where you can, like, again, where it's more offensive skill set based, and then you're making up for it, right? Like, okay, it's supposed to make up for your defensive deficiencies. How many times we have that conversation about Shane Gostisbehere? Well, as long as he's able to score, he doesn't have to be the best defender. That makes up for it, right?
Yep.
Jamie Drysdale kind of needs that in order to make up for the defensive issues. Like, I don't know, falling over your goaltender's back while he's trying to make a save. Like, how does that, right? Like, how does that happen? But beyond
Shane Gostisbehere, by the way, who has 6 goals already, or 6 points already, 4 goals.
Yeah,
leading the Carolina Hurricanes in goals.
Crazy. Yeah, because he's playing for a system that works for his game 1,000%.
Perfect.
You know, gee, the Flyers got Tony DeAngelo from Carolina a year after he had 50 points, 60 points, because the system works for guys like that. Sure, you're offensive minded and you've got backup like nobody's business with the other defensemen they have. Absolutely. So go ahead and play free. Rod Brind'Amour loves him, a free skating mobile defenseman who can jump up on the play and basically be a forward when he's got guys like Jacob Slavin back there.
And by the way, since we're talking about former Flyers who are succeeding around the league, man, you want to talk about Anthony Stolarz or Alex Lyon? Because
Lyon got humbled one of the next games. I know he had like a big, did he have a shutout or something the one game?
It's just crazy to me. Anthony Stolarz.
The two of the goalies who were backups for like the longest time are now actually succeeding with other teams. Because that's how it works.
To me, though, they're different, right? Because I don't know if Alex Lyon was ever looked at as the guy.
And he probably still isn't. That's still a rotation in Detroit.
Totally. But I distinctly remember a period of time where Anthony Stolarz, if you listen to the internet, Anthony Stolarz was the future, the savior of Philadelphia goaltending. And I mean, I get it. He's huge. He's athletic. He has turned it into a very successful career. It's just an absolute bummer. It's such a bummer. I'm glad to see him doing well, but man, the Flyers need a goalie.
Part of the reason is because he not survived. He found a way to fix his biggest problem while he was here, which was health. You know, if you can't get on the ice, then you're not going to be factored into the future. And that was one of
his stability is availability.
Right. Well, in his case, he wasn't able to do much of it while he was here. He played all right when he was here. Not great, not terrible. Like, believe me, everybody.
Was fine.
Well, I'm saying it wasn't. He wasn't a Vezina winner by any stretch, and he still isn't. I get that. But what I'm saying is that I don't even know if you could look at the years when he was playing up here that you would even say he was starter quality all the time or considered the starter.
Oh, he was a prospect still. But he was developing.
But my point is that it was better than what you were throwing out now. Like, you would have taken that at that time. Like, what you were getting at that time, you would take now, and he's actually playing better.
I would have gnawed my own foot off to have him on your roster the second half of last season. I would have gnawed my foot off because the Flyers make the playoffs by 10 points. He was the best goalie in the league last year by save percentage.
Right. I hear you.
The Flyers would have gotten in the second divisional spot last year. Wouldn't even been the third spot.
But either way, so either
I
way,
know.
like goaltending's a whole nother story. But like I'm saying, defensively, so between Drysdale, Igor Zamula, until Saturday anyway, Rasmus Ristolainen, and Risto had a great game on Saturday, and playing with Sanheim, which maybe that's the key to the whole thing. I don't know.
I think it is.
But,
I think those two are a good pair.
And let's factor in something else. I'm not going to put a tab up for it. We don't need to change the banner for it, but factor in this as well. Saturday, we find out that Cam York is out for at least 2 weeks, who I would argue has been your most consistent defenseman to this point on the season. Clearly has stepped into a role that works for him, and now he's out for 2 weeks. As you were going, and we find this out as you're going into a game where, you know what I mean, where you're going into.
Well, I think you saw the result of that on Sunday.
Well, sure, but I'm saying
I think you saw a team who was missing their best defenseman.
But this is found out before Saturday when you're sitting there looking and going, so we briefly mentioned the Jett Luchanko thing. We'll get to it more in depth in a second, but that was what the main announcement was. And then, oh, by the way, while they were at it, it's Cam York's not playing today. He's out for at least 2 weeks, and then we'll go.
That one was less fun. Yeah, and I think
you're just thinking between defensive performance and depth, for that matter, and center depth. So you just sent back the kid who was playing center for you on opening night and playing legit minutes. Like one of the I think it was the game against Edmonton, played 17 minutes.
A decent chunk.
Was the fourth highest forward in playing time that night, and now he's no longer on your team. You send him back. Not that it was going to make a difference. That's not where I'm going. We'll get to that, but we'll get to whether or not what was right or what's good for him and all that stuff in a second. I'm just saying he was your fourth highest forward in defense in ice time, the third game of the season, and now you're taking him out of the lineup permanently and saying he's going back, and then Cam York is going to be out, and it's I'm not going to use that word that a lot of other people love to use, but indirectly your team is hurting now because you just made your center depth worse and your defensive depth worse. So
is the word that you're trying not to use, does it rhyme with rank?
Yes.
And blank and sank?
Sure. But because I'm not calling that, I don't want to sit there and call it that when it's indirect. You're doing because you're doing with Luchanko what was probably going to happen. We spent the whole show assuming that was coming. So it did. Cool. Now Cam York gets hurt in the back half of the back-to-back against Washington. So he's done for the next 2 weeks at least. Now, that's not something that you plan. It's not something that you do on purpose. You don't want your guys getting hurt. It just happens. So now you take a player like that out of the picture, and you're in the middle of a 6-game losing streak at the time. And it's like, well, what game are you winning? Where's the win coming from if you just took your most consistent defenseman away and took a forward that with Luchanko, if you had looked past the fact that he was just drafted and just turned 18, if you had looked past that part, or not looked past it, but if that wasn't a factor, that he could go back to junior, right, that send him back down and all that stuff like that, you would have thought they're nuts for sending down a guy like that because nobody else has stepped up and changed anything with it.
He was the second best center.
No, but one of the things we might as well just go full bore into this then.
Sure.
Since we're on it.
Yeah.
Here's the thing that I'll say that's right about it, and I agree. Well, with both sides, Danny Briere and John Tortorella, but John Tortorella had said something earlier in the week about the reason he didn't, because nobody thought anything of him not playing Tuesday because a back-to-back was on hand, and they had already done this once with a back-to-back where he sits out one game.
Get forced during the lineup.
Right. So nobody thought anything of it until then he didn't play Wednesday, and he wasn't lining up to play Saturday. And it's like, so what's he doing here still then? Because now that does hurt. You can't have him sit around and watch 3 games. And John Tortorella said something
now he's missing 12 games.
Sure. So John Tortorella said something along the lines of, we're still figuring out whether or not he's even going to be here. So I don't want him to take on helping us get out of a hole that's on the veterans. The guys who are going to be here all year have to figure this out, not the kid who might go back to juniors in another week, as that discussion was being had. And it's not that I agree with like that he shouldn't have to help them get out of the hole. My thought is, listen, if you play for a bad junior team and start tearing it up and are good in World Juniors and all that stuff, chances are you get moved. Like the way that juniors work, no one's
You get
holding.
traded to London.
Well, juniors is it's like if players in college got traded instead of just transferring and making their own decision on it. If you got moved directly from one team to the other in college because your college program is not near as good as the one that you're going to get sent to, but it's all temporary. These kids who go to college are in college for at most 4 years or 4 seasons, I guess is the point,
And
right?
often less. Right.
Right, and often less. So it's temporary. So junior teams have no issue with, if we got to move him, we got to move him. He may, like at this point, Guelph's got to be sitting there thinking he may not even be here next year, period, for any junior team. He's out of the league potentially.
You have to expect him to be, in juniors terms, a UFA. He's gone.
Well, sure. And the closest, think about this, the closest team to where he's from in juniors happens to be the London Knights. Happens to be a team with 2 other Flyers prospects on the roster. Happens to be a team.
I'm definitely going to that Erie game. If
happens to be a team that has hopes of being Memorial Cup bound again at some point. Happens to be all of these things that should benefit Jett Luchanko in his development. And this is my thing. Like, so that's why I'm saying there's a big difference, because right away people are going to sit and go, oh yeah, his development on Guelph, which is terrible. You know, like they're not a very good junior team. Right.
But he's also going to play every situation. He's going to play huge minutes. He's their best player.
Like, I don't deny. Yeah, I don't deny
that. No, that has its limits, right? You're big fish in small pond only goes so far. But by the way, I did want to mention, if he ends up on that London roster with Barkey and Bonk, I'm going to Erie, 100%.
No, I got you. But my point is that playing, even if he didn't get traded, playing out the rest of the year on a bad junior team while taking a pause at some point to probably play in World Juniors, which is an all-star team,
yeah.
And factoring in, like I said, the fact that chances are he gets traded. Like, let's be real. They do that year by year based on, oh, we're good this year, we're not good the next year.
Every year, somebody's gearing up to make a run at the Memorial Cup, or somebody's hosting, or the Memorial Cup is such a weird.
But it rotates so quickly. They have a draft every year where guys immediately jump in because they're drafted at the age to start playing.
Yep.
Not
and there's no development. They are the development. Yeah.
Right. It's not the same thing as an NHLer who you draft the 18-year-old and say, well, now, figure it out. It may be rough sometimes, but like you're in it for the long haul, especially for a rebuilding team. Like the last thing that you want Jett Luchanko to do for the entire year, whether he's good enough to be one of the top 6, top 9, whatever you want to call it, whether he's good enough for that or not, the last thing I would want Jett Luchanko to do for the entire year is play on a team that's going to finish bottom 5 in the standings because they can't win a game. That is morale crushing for an 18-year-old who could go and play for 2 teams at minimum, or at maximum, I guess, really, but play for 2 teams.
Yeah, 12 is not going to be one of them.
I'm saying whether you consider traded somewhere and you consider playing on a World Juniors team that's going to be shooting for gold, they always do. Don't you want him to have that experience instead, to go play for a team with high expectations that may think you're a key part of the picture? That's also part of it. Like, that's where your point comes in. Play the big minutes, play all situations. Absolutely. Just go do it for a team that actually has a chance to win something versus the team that's rebuilding just because you're already the third best center on the team, probably at minimum. Right?
Did the Flyers put 3 people on Team Canada's junior team this year? Do you think Bonk and Barkey both have a shot?
Yeah. Well, Bonk did play last year, so he probably makes it again. And
might wear a letter.
And Barkey was in the camp and was one of the last cuts.
One of the later cuts.
I got to imagine he has a shot of making it this year.
Especially now that he has stepped into a leadership role with Guelph, right? I don't know if he's wearing a letter, but I know that they're big fans.
Wait. Are you
Barkey?
Barkey's the captain of the London Knights.
He just took I knew he just got leadership. Okay.
Yeah, and Bonk's an alternate, and like
Barkey's not making Team Canada. Let's be honest. So, frankly, Luchanko is probably the wild card there, right? And Bonk and Barkey, Bonk and Barkey. Whew, that'll be tough for years to come. they're theoretically shoo-ins, right, at this point. But
I mean, probably. I can
either way, there's going to
I
be some reasons for Flyers fans to be watching World Juniors.
sure.
It's going to be fun.
I would imagine so. And well, and one of the interesting things is like Barkey didn't really get going last year for a little while, right? Like most of that team didn't. Like it was like something clicked after a certain point where they just were rolling. It was, and part of it was like Barkey got really moving when World Juniors hit and he didn't go. So he was the guy on London while well, not only that, but he was the guy on London while everybody else was away.
Yep.
Bonk's gone. He's not scoring. Cohen, he's gone. So someone's got to score for London, you know?
He stepped up during that, week and a half, 2 weeks, whatever it is.
I mean, London might send half a team. London could possibly represent half a Team Canada at that rate, you know?
Oh, yeah. But they always do.
So, like, I'm actually pulling up their numbers right now because I'm genuinely curious. They haven't played a ton of games, I know. And
Barkey, we're early into the junior
and Barkey is still coming. So Barkey's only got 1 goal and 6 points through 8 games, which is still not a bad total, but it's not like there's
not lighting the world on fire in your draft.
Well, no, I'm saying it's
2.
Well, Easton Cohen, for example, who is probably their top performer last year, grand scheme of things, 6 goals, 10 points. Sam Dickinson, who's now in his draft +1, 7 goals, 15 points.
Yeah, the fact that Easton Cohen didn't make the Leafs, or kind of really hurts Denver Barkey's development, to be honest.
It does and it doesn't. It's probably honestly, it probably helps boost his numbers playing with somebody that good.
Is he playing with him or is he playing behind him?
I don't know their lines to be exact.
That's what I'm saying is if he slid down the lineup, I don't know.
No, but what I'm getting at though is that also Barkey didn't even really participate in training camp because of getting over the illness and things like that. Right. So like, if that's even still a little bit of a remnant of something, like let's check back in December at around World Junior time and find out that he might be tearing it up a little more because now he's over that for good. And
he warms up a little.
Right.
Yeah.
Like now he
can get all his off-season training in. And
well, like my point is that like Bonk, who also got sent back kind of late, all things considered, has a goal and 7 points in 8 games too. And it's like, and that's typical production of him. Like Dickinson's pretty much their top point producer defensively. And then I think after that it is, Bonk is pretty much right at the top in terms of being like, especially with the power play portion.
He is going to be fun to watch this year.
Sure.
Oliver Bonk is too good for juniors.
And by the way, well, sure. I mean, you could say that about a lot of guys.
Fair.
But the thing, like, and we're talking, like, listen, we're talking about Luchanko as if like trading him to London is what makes the most sense, like, is the most likely outcome. I don't know if that's the case. I think a trade is very likely. I don't know if it's going to be to London. There's definitely other teams that are early on start to put themselves out there as potential contenders, and
whoever's willing to give up 2029 first round picks,
pretty much,
for kids that are currently 9 years old.
Essentially, yes.
Juniors are so weird, man. They trade,
but it's not
far out.
But what I do think, and Danny Briere talked about, like both of them did. Danny Briere and John Tortorella talked about how like Luchanko has a lot to hold his head up and be proud of himself and all stuff like that. Like getting there and playing in a few games, and I get it. It's a little disappointing he didn't get a point in any of these games. I'm not holding that against him as the reason he got sent back. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. He looked like he held his own in most of those games. That's not the problem. It was just, would have been nice if he had something that rewarded him in some way, like scoring a goal, even just getting an assist, something
he deserved a little something.
Something that allows you to do more than just take the picture where you're holding the puck that says first NHL game.
I will say though, what did he play? 3 games or was it just the 2?
4.
4.
He played 3 on the road because he played the opener and then played Edmonton and Seattle and then played the home opener, and then that was when everything kind of came to an end.
I think it's fairly safe to say that unless you add at least 1 center, maybe 2, Jett Luchanko is probably making your roster next year.
I think
knock on wood, presuming health, presuming etc.
Well, and Danny Briere definitely like made it sound like there is no expectation here. Like, and when I say that, I mean, don't like I said, I come away from it feeling like since he made it this year and got a look, pencil him in next year. And I don't think Danny Briere would disagree with me for that, because Danny Briere kind of in no certain terms didn't commit to like, oh yeah, he needs another year. Oh yeah, this or like this is the path or whatever. He kind of left it very open-ended, like we'll see what happens when he comes to camp next year, maybe.
So then question for you. I don't actually know how this works. If he stays on Guelph and doesn't get traded, they don't make the playoffs or they don't make a deep run or whatever the case is.
I
Is
already
he
know what you're going to ask me.
is he free to rejoin the Flyers after the season? Because I know
Sure.
guys have come in afterward. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Now,
I mean,
do those games count towards his 9?
yes.
Okay.
Now
All
they
right.
could. Now
And I
listen.
assume they probably would. But
Well, now and listen.
at that point, can you send him to the Phantoms
Um,
if the season's over?
that might be. Yeah, well, that's sure. That's a possibility too. Because
Maybe not because he's young and it's only his draft plus 1.
I think it also like again, one of the other things for this is going to all depend on, and I'm going to try to. I'll look it up really quick just to get like a feel of maybe when we're talking in the first place. Like if nothing were to change, if he rides out the whole season with Guelph, their season finally ends on March 23rd. So let me just.
And then I think everybody makes the OHL playoffs.
No, it's 16 of 20.
Oh, is it really?
Is
Okay,
what
but
I
they
saw.
might be in that bottom. They might be in that bottom.
Right, like if they're really bad, like, and I'm just going through right now, like they are
16 of 20 is crazy.
like there is only one other team in the entire OHL that has fewer points than them right now.
In the NFL, that's like a 6-11 team making the playoffs. That's crazy.
Oh, I know. But so here's where I want to go with. So March 23rd is their last game. Now the Flyers have a game that day, but you would assume that a game on both days, like he's still going to play for he has to. He can't just leave like, oh, that's the end of the year. So the earliest he would be eligible to rejoin the Flyers would be March 25th when they're in Toronto. There are 4 games left in March at that point, and then 6 left in April. So in order for, so now here's the deal. You're trying to still keep it at 9 or less if you don't want the year to kick in, but he could play. I
assume at that point they would want the year to not to year. They would want the contract year to slide.
Right. And now what I'm saying is that because of that, so you can either do that like strategically. So he only plays at most 5 more.
The 5 best games for him or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, you could start it with don't play in Toronto because your season just ended. Take a couple days, join us at home, play play Montreal,
once or twice with us.
Right. Play Montreal, play Buffalo, play Nashville, maybe. I don't want to say skip the road trip because that's a really long time to go. Like to say just play the 5 home games that are left. There's too big of a gap there. Like I honestly, I think
it depends on where the team is at.
And honestly, I think you actually hit the more ideal placement, which would be just get him to the AHL for the rest of the year because he'd be able to since there's no one. Okay. I would assume so. I mean, if he's not able to play for the junior team, he's able to be placed anywhere basically on a tryout.
I mean, if that's the case, then
unless it has to do with them starting the clock to begin with, like the 9 games have already started, and now it's NHL or bust. Like, it's definitely not uncommon for a guy who has never played pro before to come to the league after the fact and now join a team because his junior season is over.
And now, you never know. That's something that the legal status of that could change throughout the year, just given the litigation surrounding the NHL and the NCAA and juniors. And there's all sorts of stuff that's up in the air that this could all be completely different by the time the season comes to an end.
Sure. Well, not only that, but let's put it this way. Here's the other easier way to look at it. You're doing this based off of if he stays with Guelph for the rest of the year, and that's that. Assuming he gets traded like he likely will.
And they make a Memorial Cup run.
It's not even about making a run. That's not what I'm worried about. Like, he could play 1 playoff round and be done. If his first game were to be, and we're literally talking about maybe a week and a half. We're talking about from the 23rd, which he'll already be playing at minimum, right? So let's start with the 25th then. We're talking to April 5th. It's maybe 12 days. If his playoff run lasts 12 days or more, then the Flyers have, assuming the Flyers don't get out of the hole either, and their season's going to end when it's over on April 17th, they'd have 5 games left anyway. He could literally play out the rest of the year.
One,
It
and
does nothing.
regardless, if they were by some miracle in a playoff race, it wouldn't matter anyway because playoff games don't count towards it.
Correct. I'm just saying you got to get to that point where it would be
Sure.
like
But I just mean it does not matter whether they're in it or not in it. If he comes up
No.
with 5 games to go, he can play them all and ride it out.
No, and I think what you want to watch for is that if he just can make it past the end of March, because in April they only have 6 games and only 1 prior to April 9th. So you could theoretically let him come up, even if it was April 1st, let him come back up, practice the whole week, don't play the first game of the month, and then you're in for the rest of the year. If you had to drag it out, I'm saying. Only then, but that's about it. All right. I don't want to stay on Luchanko for too much longer because we're going to keep tabs on him throughout the course of his junior season, wherever he may be playing, and World Juniors. We'll figure out where he goes from here. But you want to talk about
touch on the other which Russian you want to talk about? Because we have 2 Russians to talk about.
The one who played or the one who didn't?
We have Calder Trophy point per game, and we have first career start.
We touched on him a little bit already. I don't feel like we need to make. Unfortunately, it's not all of
thing about it, but we do have to mention. We do have to mention the Russian sensation.
All right. I'll go to the Michkov one first because you really want to talk about Matvei Michkov.
Listen, just for a second here, I just have to gush for a moment.
Okay.
We can say whatever we want about this team this year. This might not be a good year. This might not be a good team. This might not be a playoff group. This might not be. Half these players might be gone before next year's roster starts play. But Matvei Michkov is so freaking good at hockey, man. He's just so good at hockey. And I don't know what else to say. And I'm so, he is, of course, tied with Flyers legend Peter Zezel, 9 points through his first 9 career games. And it's just so incredibly fun to watch this Russian teenager play hockey.
If you want to be technical, it was 9 and 8. He didn't get a point.
I know.
In the 9th game. So that's even more impressive. Is my point.
As we sit here recording, it's 9 points through 9 games, and it is crazy how different watching the Philadelphia Flyers are when there is a superstar on the roster. And even if he hasn't emerged yet, even if he hasn't really fully, obviously there's still growth to be had. But you can already tell he plays the game differently. He thinks the game differently. He forces his teammates to think the game differently. And the whole game warps around him in every way. And it is incredibly fun to watch.
Sure. Of course it is. And listen, it's not also he's tied for the league lead among rookies in points.
Well, he's going to win the Calder.
He's got a really good shot at it. He is. It's funny that I talked all off season about talked about him in the same way we talked about Bedard, not in terms of skill set per se. He's got this. They do have a lot of.
Yeah, he's better than Bedard. That's already over.
No, that's not where I was going. Okay. I know. But what I'm saying is that my exact thoughts on Chicago last year could be my exact same thoughts on the Flyers this year, which is
this man is lipstick on a pig.
But Bedard's great. Didn't make the team any better right away because they've got work to do.
So I assume you've seen the meme of the trailer with the Lamborghini in the garage, right? The trailer with and then in the garage is a really nice car.
Okay.
And the meme is that the trailer, the dirty beat up trailer, is the Flyers, and the Lamborghini in the driveway is Matvei Michkov.
Okay.
It's very funny. It's very lipstick on a pig, right?
Sure.
And we're looking for players who can play with him, play around him. But we've already seen the entire mentality of the franchise change.
It's not too often that Michkov scored his first goal on home ice on Saturday, and it's not too often that something like that's going to happen and he'll get upstaged. It did. Sean Couturier had a hat trick. The other two guys on his line had 5 points in the game. He only had 2. Go ahead.
hot take, it only upstages Michkov because Couturier had been on a 32-game goal drought.
No,
If
what
that's
I'm talking about
if
by upstage.
that's Joel Farabee with a hat trick, respectfully, Matvei Michkov is still the story.
Well, okay, no, you know why? Well, then no, you know why it upstages? That's not even the reason. It has nothing to do with the goal
Okay,
drought. The reason it upstages is because they're his line mates. He didn't factor into the
true.
goals, but he's the one who, like, yes, he's on the ice, but he didn't get the points.
It's the
Those two
space
guys did.
creation. Yeah.
But they got the points. He was out there. I mean, he's out there in the same general area as the other two are to try to get a goal. He's on that he's on that power play where Konechny scores to tie the game. He's on the ice when Couturier scores his second. He's on the ice when Ristolainen scores the go-ahead goal. He's right there. Like Couturier scores on the rebound. He's standing by the net. He's
Oh
waiting
yeah.
for it too.
He's the first one in on the hug.
He just doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, I love that, by the way. Like,
That man loves his teammates already.
no,
It's been
he loves the game and he wants to win.
That's true.
And this is, look, a year like this is going to eat at him a lot because a game like Sundays is going to eat at him a lot because he wasn't as great on Sunday. Nobody was, but he was not, and like it was noticeable. Like he's trying. Like he's trying. He at least twice he got behind the net in that spot and went, I think I'm going to go Michigan here. Right? Let's do the lacrosse. Let's try to do it. Now, he hasn't been able to pull it off, like to get it on his stick and actually do it, but he's thinking about doing it. And there's a slight element, and I'm not trying to overly criticize the kid, so do not like go crazy, people. But there's an element where he's doing what a lot of the other guys do when it's not going well. And it's a little forced.
Doing a little too much.
Now, he might be doing it because it's like, I gotta do something. There's like he's feeling there's no juice either. And I might not be skating as fast as I normally do. I may not completely have it myself tonight, but I'm going to try my ass off to go and get something going.
And I know a lot of NHL players, frankly, have that gear in their head because every level coming up, you're the best player by far. So you can just kind of turn it on and take over a game. And he's going to figure out, hopefully, how to do that in his way at the NHL level. And obviously that looks a little different than it does when you're 12 and just the best player and you just skate around everybody. But dominant players in the NHL find ways to take over games. And if that is truly what he's going to be, then I trust that he will find his way to do so as well.
Sure, absolutely. And it's not the same thing. Like even his worst night, like that may have been like Sunday may have legitimately been his worst game of the season so far. Worst game of his career, probably.
It's a lot of his worst night.
Well, but that's my point. Yep. Other people's other people's not so good nights are invisible. His not so good night was like, the motor wasn't quite there this time, maybe to keep up with the thought process. So now he's really thinking faster than movement. And he's probably trying to force a few things that just aren't quite there. And that's about it. Doesn't mean you don't figure out where he is on the ice. Like it's completely unknown. Like there are guys who can go through a game and blend in so well in a night like that you don't remember seeing a single thing they did.
Well, we mentioned that it was a bad night for a lot of guys. Let's talk about the one Flyer who it was a good night for.
Okay.
Because regardless of the result, Aleksei Kolosov made his NHL debut. And now this is a topic that we talked a lot about in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
We talked a lot about into training camp, frankly, because the player kind of forced us to. Well, Aleksei Kolosov has come up. He has gotten his crack at the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long it will last the current moment, but as we sit here on Monday night, more than 24 hours after that game, or about 24 hours after that game, he hasn't been sent back down yet.
Well, they don't have to. That's why.
I know. But Kevin, what did you see from Kolosov on Sunday?
I mean, same thing I saw in the preseason to a degree. He's definitely he's very athletic. His movements are generally good. Really only let in one goal that I felt he needs to have. And as much as it's a power play goal against Cole Caulfield, no less, who's scoring in bunches, I get it. It's kind of a broken play because the puck goes up in the air. Caulfield grabs it, puts it on the ice, and then has time to kind of wait and then shoot. So Kolosov's square, or should be, and shouldn't really be letting anything leak through, but it leaks under his arm, and that's just a
And
rough
that
one.
was definition of kind of a leaky goal for
I
sure.
mean, one of the goals that he gives up in the game is a puck that's going 10 feet wide easy, and it hits a shin guard and goes the other direction. Like
Nothing he can do.
a rebound in front, a cross seam pass, like not even pass. It was meant to be a shot, stick breaks, puck goes all the way through. I think more than anything, he's probably shocked that nobody got a stick on it on the way to take care of it. And it ends up over at the side of the net for a one-timer. Like, he had his moments early in the game where you're like, this is shaky, because he had some really rough rebound control early. He settled in as the game went on.
A little bit antsy.
He'll get it. Will he get another look? Absolutely. I mean, here's the interesting thing with him. The thing you brought up, all the stuff over the summer and the off season and not showing up to camp on time and stuff like that, is part of the reason he's here. Because if this is a normal circumstance situation, they're not passing over a projected Ivan Fedotov start after three starts. No way. But because there's a kind of like a pseudo threat sort of
well, and we hear rumors
go
about
back to the
clock.
KHL, right? He might want to go back to the KHL if he's not an NHL goalie by blank. And there was reason to believe that was potentially the end of October. And if that's
really,
the case,
it was that soon. Wow.
There were some places were saying such. There were some reports that were it could be within like the first month that things like that. So here he is.
The only thing I had heard was early December, but maybe there was just several things floating around. But
it still was a ticking clock at the point.
For sure. Either way, it puts a strain on Danny Briere, an unusual circumstance on Danny Briere.
Right.
All of a sudden,
well, not only does it put an unusual circumstance on it, it also creates a situation where, like, not a situation, but it didn't help matter. Like, it became, I don't want to say it became an easy call up, but it became a thing where you could do this and somewhat justify it because Ivan Fedotov hadn't played well.
Well, no, Fedotov's look terrible, and you're incentivized to take a look at Kolosov before whatever this deadline is.
Yeah, but I think you would have given it beyond the first month with Fedotov.
I agree. I agree. I think
before
it's
you do this, and they went and they literally
combination of the two.
Right.
If Fedotov has come in and allowed 2 goals across 3 games, we're not having this conversation. Kolosov's still in Lehigh Valley.
No, I get it, but and then you have to see how that plays out. But but it's interesting though too, because I think watching these two is still part of the fascination of this year because they're still Kolosov's obviously new and Fedotov is still like somewhat new enough that you're still learning anyway. I think there's a decent chance that at least for the time being, given everything with Kolosov, he's going to stay and Fedotov may get put on waivers and go down when time comes.
And he'll clear with that contract. And
he'll clear with that contract, then he gets a chance to work down there, and then you go from there and see what happens. Is
there a chance we see all 3 goalies this week?
No, I don't think you're going to see that. I think I think Erisson's going in Boston for sure. They might give Kolosov the game against St. Louis, possible. Because I think
if he's up, you gotta play him, right? Like
you definitely do. Yeah, I mean, you can't just let him ride the bench the whole time, and then again, I think you go Erisson against Boston again, and then you repeat the process the next week. Okay. Maybe alternate them for the time. I don't know.
And then at a certain point, you have to mix in sending Fedotov down because.
Well, I think it's going to happen soon. Yeah. I think it's going to happen sooner rather than later, and you can figure out who you decide to bring up for that situation, one way or the other. The thing that I find not interesting, but one of the things I'll say about the goaltending thing that's a little different to me than the others, like you take Jett Luchanko out of the center group, and the center depth is already thin. You don't even have it's not like you feel like Luchanko is the guy that you have that's the young player, and everybody else is kind of still wild card material. Like, I don't know what this guy's future holds. I can't pencil him into the lineup down the road. Michkov's here now, so that takes care of that with the wingers, and you've got a lot of other wingers who you can use right now. But I think you've got enough wingers that you think eventually you're going to figure it out. Like with Konechny, Tippett, Farabee, Forster, Brink. There's
enough talent floating around.
Right. And you're adding Michkov to that picture. So it should work out. But defenseman is one position that I sit there and I go, I don't even like center. I don't know where the next guy would be. Emil Andre getting called up is great. But as far as I'm concerned, you have a bunch of guys who I think can be passable as third pairing guys. some who qualify as second pairing guys, either direct, like I think in the long run, Nick Seeler has played numbers wise like a second pair defenseman.
Maybe.
But I think you want him to be a third pair defenseman eventually.
I agree. Yep.
You
I
know what I
think
mean? Same thing with like, not even with Zamula. That's not who I was thinking of, but like, it's like putting Ristolainen down there. He probably can play second pair. He probably is paid, and he's paid like one, but I think ideally you put him on the third.
Is the last Philadelphia Flyers true number one defenseman still Chris Pronger?
I mean, might be. Yeah. I mean, when Pronger wasn't there, Timonen
Like a
probably
real actual number one.
Timonen was good. They had Mark Streit for a few years. Like I couldn't tell you last.
Mark Streit was never more than a 2. I loved Mark Streit.
Fine, you know, fine. Then level with me. The last true top pairing guy you had. I mean, short of going with the only other obvious answer I got, which is Ivan Provorov.
I was going to say it depends on if you consider the first 2 years of Ivan Provorov's career.
Well, he was good. He was good when he started, and then I think look, obviously, a lot of whatever dampened that relationship started to build up over time. Beside the point. I look at that position though, and I sit there and go, like, there's nobody I can think of immediately. Like, even Bonk is going to need some more time, right?
Yep.
I shouldn't say that, but Bonk's going to need more time, and I don't know that Bonk is a number one or a top pairing guy. I don't know that yet. It's too early to tell.
Yeah, it kind of feels like the plan is to put 4 number 2 defensemen in a trench coat and call them a number 1 defenseman. That feels like it's been the plan for 2 decades.
No,
like,
but I like
a bunch of like fine guys.
No, though, because I look at Cam York and I say maybe by the end of the year, if he continued to trend in the direction he was already starting this year and ended last year on, it's like maybe by the end of the year you're sitting there going, he is top pair worthy when it's all said and done. I'm not calling him a number 1, but he's top pair worthy. Travis Sanheim's probably more of a 2, like a second pair guy.
Yeah, and if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have told you, I would have sworn up and down that he's a top pairing guy of the future. That's a conversation for another day.
I think you utilize him in that spot. There are games where he's passable as a top pairing guy, but it's not with regularity, right?
Whether or not Dave Haxtell ruined Travis Sanheim,
and I'm not trying to have when I'm trying to spin this back to with what I'm trying to spin this back to with the goaltending is that they don't have an immediate center who's coming in that you can sit there and say isn't it like I feel like their center problems could be partially solved if they have the type of year that we're thinking that could happen since the start's been the way that it is.
End up with a top 10 pick.
You maybe even higher, and you draft a guy who is surefire, bona fide number 1 center material down the road. And now Luchanko has emerged, so you might have a 2 there, and then maybe you're a little less concerned about whether or not Morgan Frost and Sean Couturier are your 3-4 down the line, like eventually.
Well, and listen, I'll say it, October 28th. I'll go ahead and be the first one to mention Flyers have 6 picks in the first 2 rounds. So there is an absolute ton of draft capital. Mm-hmm. There is a ton to look forward to in terms of, maybe moving up in the draft, getting some better picks. There is a ton of flexibility with what the Flyers roster next year could look drastically different. I know we kind of say that every year and then it never does, but we're getting there. It's coming.
I get that. Like, what I'm saying though is that so the center position needs that, and they really kind of need that defensively beyond Bonk. Like, Bonk's nice. Bonk's a nice piece. You need a second guy. You need somebody else who maybe like you feel like down the road.
We'll see if Cam York is that guy.
See if Jamie Drysdale's that guy. I think like in a perfect world, what you would really want to see is in a perfect world, what you would want to see eventually happen is that Drysdale and York are probably your top pair, not because of defensive ability or anything like that. I'm not going off of abilities. Well, and assuming so anyway,
styles should complement each other, right? Like
it's not even about trying to go that far ahead with predicting it. My point is that's a 6th overall pick and a 14th overall pick who has played in some, and I'm taking York over Sanheim in roughly the same spot draft wise, because Sanheim is more of he is what he is. York is young enough that you can still sit there and say if he just takes that one final step, he's clearly second pair worthy. He's been passable on the first pair. He keeps growing into it. If he can just be that and Drysdale ever figures it out, that's what you possibly envision your top pairing being. And you still haven't gotten to these other guys. Right now, you need another guy. You need to draft another guy that people get that excited about. Like what I'm getting at with this when I bring the goaltending into it is you've got 2 19. The situation this year might be a total disaster with both of them. Fedotov and Kolosov may not solve your problems. Ersson may be what he is and may be better suited for being long-term backup down the line. All things considered, it's not about this year when you hear these things about these two 19-year-olds that could tear up their own respective leagues, especially Zavragin.
Well, and that's somebody to be excited about for sure. So
but I'm saying I'm lumping him in with Michkov, with what Luchanko has looked to be, and the fact that you may be in line to get a center this year because it's a center-rich first round, and you might have a top 5 pick with the way this is going. You might. This is why, like, to me, this is why this season has been a surprise. I had them finishing around 10th in the lottery. That was my guess going into the season. And they've played worse than I thought, and now you're dealing with an injury, and now you had a kid who you kept on the opening night roster and sent back, so your center depth takes a hit, and I just don't know how you keep getting out of this right now. So I'm not taking it off the table now that with the start you've had, top 5's in play.
Absolutely. Well, and as we sit here today, the Flyers currently sit 31st in points, tied with the Chicago Blackhawks 30-31, with 5 points through 9 games. And quite frankly, looking at this schedule, we might come back next week and they might be on the same number of points. We will be back
distinctly
next
possible.
week.
I mean, distinctly possible. Boston has not been the greatest to start, and St. Louis is kind of still in that middle too. I mean, a little bit better than even a little bit better than Boston. But like, to me, I also sit there and I look and I go, slow start for Boston. It feels like perfect medicine, right?
The Flyers are a slump buster.
Well, like, it's not even about being a slump buster. It like, and being that team. It's, I can't help but think, oh, you know who feasts on a team like this in general, even when they've been decent? David Pastrnak does. Brad Marchand does. Like, these are the guys who can't wait for this to happen to potentially maybe snap out of something and get a win in the process. Because it's like, it's crazy to think that Boston being, just because, you know, okay, you have a couple things, you know, you break up the goalie tandem that you had because you make a trade, you have, and it's mostly a lot like you make, I was going to say mostly a lot of the same pieces, but they added 2 big pieces in the offseason too, to kind of keep going for it. It's amazing how quickly, because they didn't get off to the hottest start. It's not by any means a disaster. It's just average. It's 4-4-1. But there's rumblings about a coaching change already and stuff like that with that. And it's like,
and Boston don't play, man.
No, it's that kind of market. I get it, but
since 1999 or so, since that Brady guy showed up, man, they have done a lot. They put a lot of rings on the board in that city.
Yeah, I hear you. And and the Bruins only have one of them, so.
Yep, and we get to see that team twice over the next week. So
fun.
You know what? Let us know on social media what you think the Flyers should do. Do they need a defenseman? Do they need a forward? Do they need a center? Do they trade? Do they? Let us know what you want. We're at YWT Podcast.
Can I take a stab?
Kevin is at Kevin _
yes,
Durso.
Yes, and yes.
Okay. Let's try to keep it realistic. Okay, if stuff's going out or if stuff's coming in, let us know what's going out. Let's talk some real scenarios, right? We've talked about some names that could move this year. Let's talk some real scenarios. We're at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin _ Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. We will be back next week. Should be on Sunday. Should be Sundays basically every week through Christmas now. So, all right, we're here for the regular season. I hope the Flyers are better than 2-6-1 when we come back next week. So until then, we'll see you.